So, we're here to talk security.
Exciting. I'm ready.
It's very exciting. So, so, so let's get started, Ben, just with, I mean, I think the biggest question is like, how big of a, that's right off the bat, like how big of a threat is security right now? If I'm a company, if I'm a consumer, like how afraid should I really be?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite quotes I'm sure you guys have heard is this, there's two types of companies, the companies that have been breached and the companies that don't know they've been breached. And I heard a quote from someone in the intelligence community that said they think on average in most companies, about 3 to 5% of the traffic in that company is malicious at any point in time. So we're living in an age where everything's porous and prevention's out the window, and we're trying to figure out kind of how do you kind of live in that environment.
All right. I mean, so 3 to 5% of traffic, 3 to 5% of traffic at every company
Basically,
is
yeah.
malicious. Do you have? And maybe you can get some sense of this from what you've seen with customers, but like at a big company, is that number like, a big target? Is the number significantly higher, or?
It's hard to know exactly, and I think by malicious they probably mean a lot of insider behavior. There may not be direct threats of attacks, but there's a lot of stuff going on that traditionally may not have been approved, and it's hard to, unless you know and can explore and understand what that behavior is. There's risk to the business, and so I think every company we look at, there's surprising stuff happening on their network almost immediately when we start getting involved.
All right, and so, so your specialty is big data,
yeah.
and I know the company Platforma was not founded around security as a use case, but explain how secure. I used to be a tech journalist, and I would talk to you about marketing. I would talk to you about customer churn and all these things, and then you come and say, "Oh, we're going to talk about security." Like, how did security come to be a thing that your customers were interested in?
Yeah, so I think we've seen an arc now in a number of different spaces. We do a lot of stuff around marketing and customer behavior. We do a lot of stuff around Internet of Things, and now cybersecurity, where the challenge fundamentally is the same in all of them. You have this explosion of raw data, different diverse types of data. In the cybersecurity context, it's net flow and intrusion detection. There's endpoint data. There's data coming from Clickstream and Active Directory about users. There's customer account data, on and on and on. And so, in any one of these cases, if you're an analyst, if you're a security analyst, it's almost impossible to figure out all the different pieces that might be relevant and stay on top of them. And so what's happening is in every one of these sectors, while there were a bunch of really point silo solutions that were designed for specific use cases, now there's this kind of move to sort of weave it all together and provide a more holistic view, so that an analyst, what Gartner calls a citizen data scientist, can start to ask more broad questions about behavior that connect the dots. And we see that in every one of the industries that we participate in.
So you brought up these. Oh, wow. You brought up these siloed kind of security solutions. Why wouldn't I use? Realistically, there are like a million security products out there, and I think if you were to follow venture capital in the past, let's say 3 years, you would see, like dozens upon dozens of security startups coming out. But I guess my question is why, kind of a general purpose, big data analytics platform versus, any one of a million things that are focused specifically on security.
Yeah. Well, let's start just for a second what we do, because it'll help frame this. So we build software that layers on top of Hadoop, which is the open source technology where you can sort of land raw data without having to decide ahead of time how it's structured and organized, and then allow regular business users to visualize, make sense, answer questions on this explosion of high volume and high variety data. So, if you traditionally use a product like Tableau on a SQL source or something like that, you're familiar with doing analysis. But here you can look at all of this data and connect the dots in much greater scale. And so what we saw was there's a number of places where companies had been using these point products. So we worked with a number of banks, and they had a traditional security information product. They even had in some cases products like Palantir, which are good for following individual investigations following the network. But there's sort of this overwhelming amount of stuff in the middle where where it wasn't in the prescribed view of a narrow product. It wasn't about one person's behavior. It was about looking at patterns across the entire organization. And there was a big gap, and it looked a lot to us like the kind of problems we were solving in these other areas like customer analytics. And our take was, look, this is interesting, but we wanted to actually see if this really resonated with some of these big banks. And what was very exciting to see was we've heard now that the role of the business analyst, the security analyst, is changing. That the challenge is becoming more about this kind of about detection, not prevention. Seeing the patterns, exploring the behavior, iterating and making sense of what's going on. And this is the kind of platform that makes sense to do that versus a lot of the traditional products, which are much more narrowed, siloed, built for one particular pre-prescribed view of a threat.
So is there a move away from, we hear a lot about kind of these prescriptive things. That's a lot of machine learning based things now, a lot of AI based things around trying to detect patterns and stop them before they start. I mean, is there some sort of, maybe it's a realization that's very difficult to actually stop something, but I mean, is it like, if you can get to the cause of it, if you can track down this pattern, like what's the, I mean, where should companies be looking, I guess?
Well, it's a good question. So, I think it's interesting, the conversations. You talk to companies that are more naive on their security infrastructure, and you'll often get these questions about, well, why would I want to do analysis? Why can't you just detect and immediately prevent when something bad happens? But when you talk to the more sophisticated guys, they'll describe how they have alerts going off in one system or another, an intrusion detection hit, or some traffic that looks maybe problematic, dozens a minute, maybe thousands a minute in some cases. There's just too much noise. And one event by itself doesn't mean enough to say anything definitive. And so there's things that need further analysis to say, is this a threat? Can I weave it together? Can I view this in a bigger context? But there's no automatic way today where you can just say, that's bad, that's a bad guy doing something. And so what we see and what our customers are pushing us towards is, how do you make this something where you're kind of augmenting superpowering that analyst to say, hey, look here, look here, look here. These things might be suspicious, but then use your human judgment with some pretty leveraged tools to really kind of try to decipher what's going on. But look back, in many of these cases, these advanced persistent threats emerged over the course of 6 to 9 months within an organization. It's not about catching it in the first second. It's about seeing the trends and behavior that could be a sign that something's going on that require further investigation.
All right. And what types of data are users actually looking at? Because I think there's kind of, you would think like, well, there's security log data, there's network traffic, there's these kind of traditional security type data types, but then, when you talk about big data, this is what kind of a cliche topic now, but you're talking about a lot of it is the variety of stuff essentially, and maybe you're looking at the weather patterns. So what types of data can you actually look at, to take this beyond the traditional realm?
So I'll give you an example. One of our guys was in one of our customers just a couple of weeks ago, and there was something had been flagged where 3 people in the company hadn't received their paycheck that week. And this had been flagged, and they were trying to understand what was going on. And so that would be a pretty lengthy investigation, typically, to kind of track back through the systems. But what they did in this case is they basically took the payroll data set, just dumped it into the data lake, into Hadoop, in conjunction with the rest of the data, which was all the net flow and all the different sort of traditional security data. And you can start to look and see the patterns. Was there a phishing attack that had happened? You can look with the network flows around those 3 people. Was there something about them in connection with each other? Was there some pattern that suggested some malware on their machines, etc.? And pretty much they were able to remediate the issue in about 2 hours, where traditionally that would have been a pretty lengthy process. And so we see a lot of the times it's mixing in additional data, being able to slice, looking at, if I'm looking at flows of traffic out of my network, for example, I might care a lot about, where's that traffic going to? What countries? Is traffic going to some country that's a known bad actor, maybe flagged? But also, is it unusual for the people involved? So if somebody in marketing suddenly is taking a lot of data related to some source code, or if there's a dramatic, significant change in behavior all these different deltas become interesting things to further investigate. And you only see that when you take a sort of a step back.
So how much? I mean, so we're talking about payroll. You're talking about like sales. You're talking about all these things. Like where you're talking about traffic patterns. I mean, like how much data realistically, if you want to get your handle on on your activity. I mean, are you talking about storing like literally everything that's generated and putting it into?
I mean, it depends on the company, but I think that that's where it's headed. I mean, I think we're seeing, for example, some of the endpoint systems doing endpoint detection, things like Tanium and others that are really good at sort of detecting what's going on in real time on the endpoints. You know, that's generating more data that's not being captured in most companies. There's stuff happening across the network in terms of flows. You know, one of our customers, we were actually in there, and we're sitting down with a team looking at a marketing use case around clickstream against their website. And then we saw this behavior that seemed a little unusual around, it seemed like they were doing something with the sort of refreshing the cookie in a strange way. And we're just sort of sitting there, and this again was something where just in the course of half an hour, something was unusual. They called over a cybersecurity guy to just say, hey, what's going on here? And pretty quickly, there was clearly something that looked like it was a breach. They were able to pull in another few data sets in about 20 minutes and then start to kind of unwind something that had never been seen before in that organization. And so I think what's happening is we're moving outside of having prescriptive silos around the data that's classically the security data. And you know, it could be customer account data, it could be clickstream and marketing behavior, it could be these others that start to inform the bigger view of behavior that might be interesting to see from a security context.
So it sounds like a lot of this is, you know, when we talk about machine learning, one of the big things, you know, there's the initial thought I think that goes through a lot of people's minds is, oh, machine learning, that means people, you know, whatever, machines are smarter than people aren't involved. And then I think when you actually talk to practitioners, they say, oh no, people are very much involved. Yeah. Like, I mean, so what's the interplay? Because a part of me saying, well, a machine should be able to detect some of these trends and you don't need a person to do that. Yeah. But then the other part is like, when you say, an analyst goes in and says, oh, but I need to pull in these three other data from these three other places. Like, what's the actual interplay between a human and a machine in the security context?
Yeah, I think we see this trend in pretty much everything we do, where there's always obviously progression of predictive analytics and machine learning techniques, and they're getting better and they're solving different problems, and very excited about some of the deep learning and other techniques. But you know, some of these things are really kind of AI complete problems. I mean, understanding behavior on your network holistically, and should that person be doing that thing in that context, is not something that can be fully automated. You can suggest something might be interesting to look at, but there's just intuition and gut and experience around looking at these things that's so critical. And so where we see this headed is where the tools are getting better to enable these analysts to directly interface and ask these questions and iterate and give them the sense to do this without the 9-12 months of IT work every time they want to answer a question. But then it's really about how can we start to use machine learning almost to kind of extend the arms and legs and the sensing ability of the people, give them a better sense of here's where to focus, here's something that might be a problem, here's a cockpit of tools that might be relevant in this context. And so we're looking a lot at how do you enable that analyst to be more powerful through machine learning extensions to their abilities, rather than how do you make it a black box thing, because we think that in many cases that's decades away from being realistic.
All right. So this isn't necessarily a security question, but you know, if I'm taking a broader view of what we're talking about, it sounds kind of like, and this is, you know, maybe Platfora specific, but I don't think so. There's kind of a move, it sounds like, almost away from very specialized, and maybe Hadoop helped do some of this. Maybe, you know, we hear about full stack engineers. We hear about these types of generalist people and technology. I mean, is there a move away? Do you see a move away from, you know, use case specific technology and toward kind of a broader platform, you know, kind of a one-stop?
Yeah, it's a really interesting trend because there's a tension in both directions. You know, you have a move towards SaaS applications that are more quick win sort of siloed apps, and they have their own data and they often have their own analytics. And you've had that, you know, in Clickstream and, you know, with Omniture and things like that. You've had it now in many other domains. At the same time, we're also, you know, there's a big understanding now we're seeing across enterprises that but it's connecting the dots across these data sets where you can really get to see inside. You know, the way someone behaves and the way they purchase, that may shed light on how you might want to engage with them from a marketing standpoint. You might want to understand their product experiences in that context. You can see more and more about the complete customer journey, and that you don't want that slashed up between these different silos. And so I think there is a tension of how do you weave this together into, you know, we see companies often asking this question of, do I go use a SaaS app that is narrow and but is built for the purpose and can give me specific, you know, analytics or capabilities here, but I'm doing it on a narrow view of data, I'm doing it on a limited window, or do I bring it into my data lake where I can now mix it up with everything, but again, today I'm sort of rolling my own, I'm sort of building from scratch. And I think this is leading towards saying, how do you build and kind of application enable the data lake so that you can start to build more and more rich, reusable capabilities, but not against silos of data, can connect and see the bigger picture of data in those contexts. Really early in the journey, though.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, well, on one hand, it seems insane that, like, I mean, there are so many. I mean, if you go out in the hall here, there's a million startups. There's a million SaaS startups and a million business intelligence and everything startups. And it does kind of seem like, I mean, if you can connect all that, maybe use everything kind of for what it's used for, but you do need that one. It seems like the more you can have that one source of truth, the more you can have that, but not an enterprise data warehouse sort of thing, but kind of where you can dump literally everything, and you know.
Yeah, no, I was talking to one of the leaders of one of the cloud division of one of the big system vendors, big cloud infrastructure companies, and you know, we were talking about this exact problem, and so we were speculating that, like, over time there might be there's like a plug that every SaaS app has where the data feeds out into the sort of shared data lake that you can start to use then to sort of do this analysis more broadly. But we haven't seen that yet, and I think that today, honestly, if you're an enterprise, you know, there's been a bunch of great work to tie in single sign-on and logins and everything else. But from a view into kind of behavior of your users or your customers, it's still custom integration. You know, people are doing integrations of Marketo and Salesforce and all these things. We're still back in the clumsy kind of, you know, EAI integration days. This is not holistic, you know, ability to kind of, you know, connect the dots and ask these big questions. And I think we need to get there. But this is an interesting industry-wide challenge right now.
So if we bring it back to the security discussion, I mean, based around that, like, I mean, what's your sense of? I know this isn't necessarily your business, but I'm just curious what your sense is as a business person, right? Like when you're storing data in all these various places, when you're building your business based on, you know, 15 different SaaS applications, like, I mean, what does that say about the security problem and the difficulty of analyzing and spotting these things when, you know, maybe the breach didn't come from within your network, right? Maybe the breach was in your Google apps, and now you're trying to.
Yeah, no, it's getting really interesting. I mean, you know, there's interesting work on reverse proxies and other ways of trying to, you know, track enterprise traffic through the cloud. So you're trying to get data on the communication, but that's just one type of data. You know, there's so many different facets of this. I mean, I think the biggest thing we see, I mean, if there's one point of guidance, is that, you know, there probably will be more standard packaged applications, and the next generation of security products will keep coming. But I think there's a really critical role in any enterprise today for that security analytics, that sort of data security analytics expert who can, you know, sit down, bring together data, and just ask questions and say, well, let me look at that pattern. Something changed here. What's going on? And not be tied to just there are these specific vectors. They're actually looking for new and interesting changes in behavior on the network or in the usage of their applications and the rest. And you know, because at some level, you know, you can, for a lot of those products, you know, traditionally you would need to have a signature or an algorithm to detect some threat, but there's no way of hiding the behavior. If there's a bad guy on your network, there's going to be data moving. There's going to be network traffic. There's going to be things that are happening. You know, at the end of the day, if you look for what's happening, the actual outcomes of the behavior, there's no way to hide that there's going to be always going to be something going on that reflects some bad behavior. So I think having this analyst persona as as something where we're investing and building up capabilities is really key.
I think this is last. We have time for one more question. So, I mean, so if you're looking out, like, I mean, you know, the talk the last several years has been about, well, how do we? I mean, data scientists became a big thing, and then immediately it was, how do we get rid of these data scientists and let everyone do this sort of work, right? I mean, that's kind of what Platform was based around to some degree. I mean, that was kind of the pitch. Like, so we're talking about security analysts. Is there a point where the security analyst is just, you know, the line of business, employees watching, you know, more savvy watching their data and be able to track things, or how does that security analyst role change as technology broadens?
No, I mean, I think that there's I mean, some of this may be outsourced, but I think there's a really key role where you'll have expert people watching and looking and asking questions at, say, the security perimeter. But, I mean, it's not the perimeter. The security posture here is one where there's going to be ever-escalating threats, and you know, I do think that you know, this will be beyond a lot of companies to manage in-house. There'll be combination of technology and tools and expertise, but I do think you need people being superpowered by these tools, watching and studying and looking for changes. As the tools get better and better, they'll be more focused, they'll be more targeted, they'll be more leveraged. But I don't think the human's out of the equation for, you know, a decade or more, maybe 10, 20 years. This is not a situation where there's a silver bullet of the right algorithm solves it all.
All right, great. So we're out of time, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.